Steven Brian Pennell, also known as the Route 40 Killer, was a notorious serial killer who terrorized the state of Delaware in the late 1980s. He targeted sex workers and is believed to have murdered at least 8 women during his killing spree. Pennell's brutal and sadistic crimes stunned the community and left law enforcement searching for answers. He was eventually captured and sentenced to death, becoming the first person to be executed in Delaware in 45 years. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the life and crimes of Steven Brian Pennell, exploring the events that led to his descent into darkness and the trail of terror he left behind. From his childhood to his eventual capture, we'll examine the factors that contributed to his reign of terror and the legacy he left behind. So, join us as we delve into the disturbing world of the Route 40 Killer. But before we get started, please make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified about our amazing upcoming informative videos. Now sit back, relax, and let's go. Early life. Steven Brian Pennell was born on February 4, 1958, in Wilmington, Delaware. He had a difficult childhood and was reportedly neglected by his parents. He was bullied in school and struggled to make friends, leading to feelings of loneliness and isolation. Despite his struggles, Pennell was considered intelligent and excelled in school, particularly in science and math. In his teenage years, he became interested in sadomasochism and bondage and began to explore these fetishistic desires through pornographic magazines and videos. He also experimented with drugs and alcohol, which further escalated his feelings of anger and frustration. After high school, Pennell entered the workforce and held a series of jobs, but struggled to maintain stability and was frequently fired or quit. He eventually became a truck driver and spent much of his time on the road, further isolating himself from others. It was during this time that he began to target sex workers and carry out his horrific crimes. Despite his gruesome actions, he managed to elude the authorities for several years, earning him the nickname the Route 40 Killer. Murders and victims. The first victim was 23-year-old Shirley Anna Ellis, a nurse. On November 29, 1987, she left Wilmington Hospital around 6 p.m., where she was aiding an AIDS patient, catching a lift on her way home on Route 40. Her body was later found by the roadside by 2 boys. She was partially nude, her legs spread out, hands and feet tied with adhesive tape. There were no signs of sexual assault, but she had been seriously abused, with her killer tying a string around her neck and hitting her head with a hammer before she died. The second victim was 31-year-old divorced prostitute Catherine A. DeMauro. On June 28, 1988, about 7 months after the first murder, around 11:30 p.m., she was seen walking down Route 40, but it was unclear if she was prostituting herself. At 6:25 a.m., construction workers found her naked body at a construction site. Her wrists were tied to her feet, her mouth was clogged with adhesive tape, no signs of sexual assault were found. Like Ellis, she was killed by hammer blows and strangulation, but unlike the first murder, DeMauro's body was covered in blue fibers. Special police forces, along with the FBI's profiling unit, concluded that a serial killer was operating in close proximity to Route 40. Police and federal agents disguised as prostitutes in an attempt to gather information, with a task force of over 60 people being formed solely to capture the killer, but to no avail. On August 22, 1988, 27-year-old prostitute Margaret Lynn Finner disappeared. A number of witnesses had seen her enter a blue Ford driven by a white male near Route 13. About 3 months later, her body was found floating in the Chesapeake, Delaware Canal. The body was so badly decomposed that the cause of death couldn't be determined. On September 23, 26-year-old Kathleen Ann Meyer, of Brookmont Farms, disappeared. A police officer saw her board a blue Ford on Route 40 at 9:30 p.m. He was able to write down the identification plate, which turned out to belong to Pennell's car. Her body was never found. Capture and trial. The capture and trial of Steven Brian Pennell marked the end of a years-long manhunt for the Route 40 Killer. He was finally arrested in 1988 after a tip from a trucker led the police to a motel room where he was staying with a female companion. Evidence found at the scene, including ropes, handcuffs, and a saw, linked Pennell to several of the murdered sex workers. During his trial, Pennell was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, and prosecutors presented evidence linking him to the crimes through physical evidence, eyewitness testimony. Despite his defense team's efforts to argue that Pennell was not mentally fit to stand trial, the jury found him guilty on all counts. The capture and trial of Steven Brian Pennell sent shockwaves through the community and brought closure to the families of the victims. While his actions were unspeakable, the resolution of his case serves as a reminder of the dedication and perseverance of law enforcement in bringing justice to those who have suffered at the hands of a serial killer. Death. Steven Brian Pennell was executed by lethal injection on January 25, 1992, at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center in Smyrna, Delaware. He was the first person to be executed in the state in 45 years. His execution was carried out without incident and he was pronounced dead at 10:06 p.m. Before his death, Pennell made a final statement, expressing remorse for his crimes and apologizing to the families of the victims. He also expressed hope that his death would bring them closure and allow them to move on with their lives. The death of Steven Brian Pennell marked the end of a brutal chapter in Delaware's history. His execution was the result of years of investigation and tireless work by law enforcement and the legal system to bring him to justice. While his death does not undo the harm he caused, it serves as a reminder of the consequences of such horrific actions and the importance of holding those who commit such crimes accountable. In conclusion, the story of Steven Brian Pennell is a tragic tale of a man who spiraled into darkness and committed unspeakable crimes. Despite his troubled past, he was ultimately held accountable for his actions and faced the consequences of his choices. The victims of the Route 40 killer will never be forgotten, and their families have shown remarkable strength and resilience in the face of such tragedy. The capture, trial, and execution of Steven Brian Pennell serves as a warning to others that justice will be served to those who commit such horrific acts. Until next time, stay curious and stay tuned.